Sveicināti, cienījamie skatītāji! Jūs ekrānos raidījums Kāpēc, un studijā esmu es, Alinu Lastovsku. Šonedēļ aprit 4 gadi, kopš Krievijas mēroga iebrukuma Ukrainā. Šajā laikā esam daudz domājuši un arī daudz darījuši, lai stiprinātu mūsu drošību un aizsardzības spējas, un arī citas NATO dalību valstis ievērojami palielinājušas savus tēriņus aizsardzībai. Kas vēl būtu jādara un par NATO plāniem krīzes situācijai, šodien plašāk runāsim ar NATO daudznacionālās divīzijas ziemeļa komandieri ģenerāli majori Jeti Albinusu. Sveicināti! Bet vispirms neliels ieskats tajā, ko jūs darat.
NATO daudznacionālās divīzijas štābs Ziemeļi izveidots Ādažu bāzē 2019. gada martā. Tas ir starptautisks militārs formējums, kurā kopš 2023. gada ietvaru valstu loma ir Latvijai un Dānijai. Divīzijas mērķis – uzlabot Baltijas valstu aizsardzību un stiprināt NATO kolektīvo atturēšanu. Divīzijas štābs pilnu kaujas gatavību sasniedz 2023. gada jūlijā. Štābā pašlaik ir pārstāvētas 13 valstis. Ikdienā NATO spēki kopā ar Latvijas nacionālajiem bruņotajiem spēkiem piedalās militārās mācībās, lai stiprinātu spēju reaģēt uz drošības izaicinājumiem. Militāru uzbrukumu gadījumā šī divīzija kopā ar mūsu pašu armiju nodrošinās Latvijas aizstāvību. Par štāba komandieri 2023. gada vasarā kļuva ģenerālmajore no Dānijas Jeti Albinusa.
And the rest of MD North and I promise that we will do our very best to fulfill our mission and our task.
Albinusa ir pirmā sieviete, kura Dānijas karaliskajā armijā ieguvusi ģenerāļa pakāpi. Komandierei ikdienā pakļauta arī Latvijas armijas mehanizētā kājnieku brigāde, bet mācībās un kara gadījumā vēl 2 zemesardzes brigādes.
So we have this conversation on Monday morning. It will be broadcasted on Wednesday because we have to translate it, but we are not going to edit this conversation. And first of all, this week marks 4 years since Russian full-scale invasion in Ukraine, and we talk much about our security, about our defense, and can we say that NATO, Europe and this eastern flank now are strong enough to face possible risks if needed?
Yeah, I think I will start with what you mentioned at the end, strong enough. I think if you ask a military commander like me, we will never say we are strong enough. I also assume that it's the same way that the Latvian armed forces and the Latvian politicians feel. But we are for sure in a better situation, and we keep improving all the time, both when it comes to forces here, how we operate together, and of course also what is happening along your border and the Baltic defense line.
About improvement, what worries you most right now when you look at the security situation in Baltic region?
I think I will expand it because if the whole world only was focused on Putin, then I think I would be more reassured. But we have other actors in the big strategic environment. We have China, and from time to time also our good allies, the United States, is influencing or at least dividing our focus in different areas.
Last summer, in an interview for journals IR, you said that knowing how Russia acts, we must do everything, so they do not even think about attacking or at least think twice. Have we reached that level?
Yeah, I think so, but it's also a matter of changing the mindset. If we focus on the division I'm commanding, the division's first task before 22 was primarily to train. That changed after Russia attacked Ukraine in 22, and now the task was to deter and, if necessary, to defend. I choose, I think after being here a year, to turn that around, thinking about how would I actually be able, with the troops on the ground, together with Latvia, to deter. And my conclusion was, based on how Russia thinks and how they fight, that the best way to show that was that I would be capable, willing and able to defend Latvia. So instead of focusing on deterrence and then defending, we focus on being able to defend whatever we have in our hands at any given time.
And you feel you are able now?
Yes, I will do that, and I won't ask myself, okay, am I really able? Do I lack this and that? I will prepare myself and my troops to fight with whatever we have, and then hopefully things keep improving like it has been for the last 2 years, right?
But also improvement, is this list long or short what we have to do?
I think it's medium if you ask me right now. One thing is the soldiers on the ground. Another important thing is, of course, do we have the necessary equipment, what we in military terms call enablers. And right now, there are still some enablers that are lacking. But what I then do is that I focus on making sure that I have the people in the headquarters and in the units trained to be able to use it. And also we have the right procedures in place. So we still try to see whatever we can do on our side. And I'm sure, and I'm also convinced that, should something occur here, that if we, for example, are lacking one specific system, hopefully we will then get it. But it wouldn't help us if I didn't have the trained staff and I didn't have the ability to use it, right?
About abilities, there were several reports about exercises in May 2025, Hedgehog, and there was reports that Ukrainian drone operators defeated NATO combat group during this joint exercise. So is NATO really ready for drone warfare?
To a certain degree, yes. Not fully. I think what they made in Estonia was very good because, of course, all forces in Europe, maybe in the whole world, except Ukraine and Russia, need to implement the lessons learned. So I think here in Latvia, we as NATO have the fortune that the Latvian forces, including the National Guard, actually have a number of drones, and they also have tactics for using it. And last year, I deployed some NATO troops to play the opponent against the 2nd National Guard. And the 2nd National Guard, I think, beat us because they were using the drones. So we learned a lot from that. And that's one of the big benefits we have here. So even though we are not at the same level as Ukraine or Russia, and I don't think any country would be that unless you are in the fight, because things is going so fast. But we really try to learn from it. And here I think I have a great opportunity for all the NATO troops that are here, that they can actually learn from Latvia in this case.
So you can assure society that NATO and Latvian defense forces have done the best they could to be ready for this drone attacks and everything.
Yeah, and we keep improving and we keep trying to be better. But I will also be honest that, we can never guarantee anything. We can never guarantee that a drone won't pass. So I think also it's about being realistic, what we can do against drone or, as I rightly would say, unmanned systems and autonomous systems. Because that's the systems we are seeing more and more. It's not only drones in the air, we also have unmanned system on the ground and in the sea. And we have as military forces to prepare ourselves for both being able to use it, but also being able to protect ourselves against it. And that's a time race to be able to do so. And one of the reasons we have faced, even though we are overall in NATO, a small NATO entity, we have developed a division experimentation cell because we need to be able to adapt what we see right now, not only what's happening in the war between Ukraine and Russia, but also the whole technology that of course will affect how we fight. And then we try to adapt that into our level, and we do that in close cooperation with NATO, but of course also with Latvia.
So you would say that army is adapting fast enough?
Well, again, coming back to the point earlier, it will never be fast enough, but we are doing the best we can.
But about politicians or other, actors' decisions, is there any lack of decisions, or are they too slow to, give you all the instruments you need to have?
What I feel here in Latvia is actually that your politicians are very aware of the threat. Maybe they're even pushing us harder than, we're able to implement. Because when it comes to NATO troops, I depend on the countries and all their governance to procure and make sure I have the right equipment, right?
So if we return to the situation in Ukraine, are we closer now than a year ago to the end of the war? What would you say?
Well, that will be my personal view. Unfortunately, I think we are more or less in the same situation as we were 1 year ago. I cannot see any changes that would indicate a close end to the ongoing war, unfortunately.
Our parliament adopted a statement last week and expressing support to Ukraine, and there was also in the statement that Saeima supports an effective long-term strategy by the member states of European Union and NATO aimed at putting an end to Russia's aggression and signing a peace agreement that would ensure the strategic defeat of Russia. Is really our strategy effective enough to achieve those goals?
Maybe there is nothing wrong in the strategy, but that strategy also depends on the main players, whether they actually are willing to end the war, right? And here I can be concerned about the Russian perspective, because again, my personal perception is that they are maybe saying one thing, they are maybe participating in peace negotiations, but we don't see any willingness on the way they fight on the ground, right? I'm lacking that.
You also have said that Russia cannot fight on two fronts at the same time. That would mean that any action elsewhere would require a ceasefire on peace in Ukraine. So do you see it as a realistic scenario that Russia might test NATO if talks on peace or ceasefire in Ukraine is successful?
Well, first of all, you should never be naive, right? And you can never say anything for sure. So as military planner, we always prepare for the worst. As long as the war is ongoing in Ukraine, I think the risks are lower here. But of course, if it comes to an end, the risk will increase. But we also have mechanisms for that. We have what we in the military term call indicators and warning. So of course we will look closely. The troops, the Russian troops that now are engaged in Ukraine, will they go home to Russia? Would they reorganize? Would they regroup? And all of that would give us indications, but also warning of should something occur, for example, to one of the countries here in the Baltics.
You said we shouldn't be naive. Are they still kind of naive people left in Baltic states or Latvia? What's your impression?
No, not in the Baltics or in the Latvian state, but I can think of my own country. And for sure, sometimes I think that the Danes, for example, still are naive. It's kind of, we have a hard time really taking in the threat. Of course, one can say if you live next to Russia and you have Russia at your border, it's different. But we have seen examples of things happening in the hybrid phase that also now is happening in Denmark. And I think as Danes, we were too slow, but I find here a very different perception of the threat. And I think you're more realistic in that context.
You also mentioned that this phrase we often hear is that don't panic, but be ready for the worst case scenario. Is Latvian society ready for a crisis situation?
I will say I now primarily know what's happening here in Latvia and of course in my own country. And if I compare these two, I think in this case it's the Danes that can learn from Latvia. Of course there are still things that can be improved in both countries, but you are further in your planning. Again, I think it comes back to you know what you have to do. Of course it takes time and it also costs a lot of resources. But for example, if I look at the preparation you have done in case a war should come, it's much further than what I've seen in Denmark. Then there is also another area where I'm a little bit emphasized, or I would love if my own people would have the same kind of sense, and that's when it comes to the way you take responsibility. As you can see, I'm actually wearing this one on my shoulder because I think it's an amazing initiative, and that it's every individual's responsibility to make sure that your freedom stays free and a sovereign state. In my country, none of us can remember that we hasn't been that or been there. So I think we take it for granted. You don't do that here. And I think right now the Danish system is struggling with getting that readiness and preparedness among their population. So I actually sent home this idea, and I also...
Yeah, I don't know if it was visible for audience. You have this mana Latvija, mana atbildība.
Yeah.
So you think there is, so mainly here in Latvia we have this idea in our mind.
At least you are much further in your planning and in your mindset that compared to my own country. I'm not able to say, okay, how much better or what is lacking if I compare it to Estonia or Sweden. But I and the troops here, we can learn from Latvia in that context. But again, of course, there's still things that can be improved. There always are.
Can you mention those things? What are our weak points?
Well, when it comes to shelter, I think all European countries have forgotten everything about that due to the situation we have had for the last 30 years. I received recently a briefing that you are now looking into this, you are trying to tell people where to go. And again, that's further than what is happening in my country, even though they start looking into it. So it's one area, how to protect our people. That's definitely an area that is important. And then, of course, something that can only be developed, and you are doing that, is the rehearsal. How do we get the different responsible institutions to work together? And the only thing to make sure that it's up running, should it be required, is to have exercises, more exercise, train together also with the armed forces.
But so the main point and the most important point would be for everybody to understand their own responsibility in any crisis situation. And
yeah, and I think here it's important that when we talk about that, it's not only about, being able to fight with a weapon in your hands. There are so many things that needs to continue working if crisis or war should escalate or happen. And we need, for example, to be able to take care of our elderly people. What about school, educations? There are so many things that you can do, even though if you don't see yourself as a war fighter. There's still a lot of functions that need to be up running, electricity, heat, everything, right? Road repair, stuff like that.
Okay, if we go to bigger level, to military level, you already have said about Article 5, you commented on that. If Latvia is attacked, I will send all my forces into the fight. But does political rhetorics affect this confidence in how fast decisions would be made and reinforcement would arrive here if something happened?
Well, I think I will explain it from my point of view. So if we see any indications or warnings, I would deploy my forces according to the plan we already have, a plan that is developed in close coordination with the Latvian Armed Forces and their National Defense Plan. I will deploy my forces out there. So we will be standing shoulder by shoulder, ready in case should something happen. And I would rather do that one time more often than required, or too early than too late. And we have to remember that I can always do that. And we also have to remember that we won't attack anybody. We would defend Latvia. So should Latvia then be attacked, and I'm standing shoulder by shoulder with NATO troops among the Latvian soldiers, if they then attack a Latvian soldier, they also attack NATO, and then I have the right to defend myself. So that's the whole thinking about it. So I won't hesitate. And I really mean it when I say I won't hesitate. I will not be the commander responsible for what we saw in Bosnia in Srebrenica. Then I would rather go to prison afterwards instead of being ready and able to fight.
But just politician statements and rhetorics affect the sense of NATO unity among military persons?
Sorry, I'm not sure I quite understood that question.
We all heard, statements by US President Donald Trump about Article 5, about NATO, about what happened you commented already all that in Afghanistan. And does this statements and rhetorics affect the sense of unity? among?
Of course, to a certain degree, it does. On the other hand, if I look back on my previous deployments, it has never been all the NATO members that, have chosen to take part in a NATO mission. So as long as United States, in this case, still is a part of NATO, I feel confident, like here, that, the countries that sign up for a mission will still sign up and do so. I also think recently that we have had some good statements saying, of course, that we don't plan to do so. And so far, NATO stand coherence. And it's also what I experience here on the ground, also with, let's just put a name on it, with the American troops. I haven't felt any different attitudes or behavior. I still have good conversation. We still work closely together. That also comes to higher American commanders here. I still feel that they're very engaged and very keen on improving our ability to solve our tasks.
In the recent interview for the journal Sir, you also said that you need to reassure your soldiers that NATO is still united, and you also mentioned that current events affect Danish and Canadian soldiers and yourself, of course. Does the situation feel calmer now after this World Economic Forum in Davos?
Yes, it does. But still, again, something is always happening. So we have to deal with that. But I think, especially for me, being a commander of the multinational unit, it's important to be aware of what is going on that affect your troops. In this case, we can talk about Greenland, Canada, and Denmark, but also when we had lately, unfortunately, the shooting in Canada, and then I'm very aware, and then I address the soldiers, because of course it matters what happens in your home country. And I think that's an important obligation I have as commander, as addressing that. And sometimes it's not something I can change, but at least I can try to reassure them that we're here and we can talk about things, so we don't hide it away.
Okay. On the weekend, we also had this news that statements by Donald Trump. He said he was sending a hospital ship to Greenland, and Greenland said no thanks. Do you follow these developments closely?
Yes, of course I do. Of course I do.
How do you feel about when you read those news and articles?
I think probably I have it the same way as many other people who is reading the news. Sometimes I can't even imagine that it's happening, right? Because some of the actions seem so far away from what normally was at least the codex for how to engage in the international environment. Then I can also have it the same way as I know some of my family members have it back home, that I just shut down the news because, well, it's a way to get a pause from it.
Is it important for you that European leaders and other leaders publicly support Denmark in this situation?
Yeah, of course it is, and I think that's strong, and it's also about being united. So of course it means a lot, yeah.
I would like to ask one more question about Denmark. Since law changed in 2025, women in Denmark can be called up for 11 months of military service. You have said that we cannot exclude half of society based on gender, and that many stereotypes still exist about what makes a good soldier. But if we want stronger army, it is not possible without mandatory service for women?
No, I think it would be hard on the longer term, because then you can only, as you said yourself, recruit 50% of the population. And what we see today is also that because our habit have changed, if you are a young boy or a girl, many, at least in my country, are less physical active and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So there's a smaller minority that is either mentally or physically capable of being that. That being said, I also think that if you have conscription, then I think it's also, we very often focus on discrimination against females. I think in this case, it's a discrimination against the male, because if you want to force people in for being conscript, then it should go for everybody, right? Then it's equality.
With the increase in women serving in the Danish armed forces, did this require, if you know, major changes to training or military infrastructure Because we're also discussing about that, and we have a lot of discussions about infrastructure and so on, but...
Of course, there are certain areas, and when it comes to infrastructure, you need to think about, right? But when it comes to the requirements, I think it's so important, and that we still are struggling with in Denmark. It's so important to look at the function we give to a soldier. To that function, there are some mental requirements, cognitive requirements, and there are some physical requirements. And you have to live up to that, no matter whether you're a female or you're a male, right? Because war don't distinguish. So if that's what required to fulfill the function, then you have to live up to. What we need to be better at is realizing that these requirements are not the same depending on the task you have had. And even if I go back when I started, where we were very, very few female in the Danish Armed Forces, we also took the officer conscript and put him in the officer in the military army. And we took the strong farmer guy to carry the grenades. So we have always done that. So in my mind, there is no different. But that comes back to the perception of a soldier. There has to be, a big person able to run over the fields for many hours. And some needs to be able to do that. But the majority doesn't, right? We still have systems that are working, a drone operator and stuff like that. So I think also for the benefits of getting more male in, we should be more focusing on recruiting to specific functions and then making sure that they have the necessary skill set instead of saying, well, everybody then has to live up to this or that.
Okay, and in Latvia we also have this ongoing discussion about that, and also about, you mentioned stereotypes. There is a lot of stereotypes in this discussion. Why still we have it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think very often also in my army, when we are struggling with this, we kind of say, okay, now the army have to fix it. Personally, I think we need to go back, because I think a lot of it comes to the way we are brought up and the way we also treat our young or our children in schools, right? We still have a perception of a female, how a female should look like, what a female ought to be good at, instead of looking at the individual. So if we really want to change this, I think we have to start there, but that's a long time work to do so. I will also say that if I look at the number of females you have, also in the National Guard, you actually have quite a number. But I would challenge this a little bit, because I still see the majority of having functions like, administration, medical, and stuff like that. So maybe these girls who already have, completed their training should say and ask for also showing that they can go into the warfighting function. That could maybe also help the transformation here in Latvia.
So first of all, capabilities and training and skills, not gender.
No.
When you became the first woman in Royal Danish Army to hold the rank of general, did you think about being a role model or inspiration for other women?
If I go a little bit back, I actually avoided that for many, many years. Because I chose this job because I wanted to be a soldier and later an officer. And the best way I normally can explain it is, if you want to be a doctor, right? You don't sign up to be a female doctor, or you don't want to have special requirements because you're female, and so do the people you're gonna help also not want to, right? And it's the same when you sign up as a soldier, and I've talked to a number of female Danish officers and also foreigners. Many of us just want to be good at our profession. But I also realized when I became a general the first time that there were some expectation, and I also realized that in some cases I could make a difference. So I have chosen to participate more in events like that, but previously I said no. But now I also think I have a responsibility to say what I think and what is it required, to try to help everybody to be more, equal.
So this avoidance of talking about gender mostly was connected with that you didn't want to be treated differently?
Yeah, I wanted to be accepted for my profession, right? I wanted to be a good soldier and I wanted to be a good officer, and I didn't want to have any special treatment. And also coming back to my previous point about you cannot make different requirements because war don't differ, right? You are a soldier is a soldier.
But during your career in the military, you felt like treated differently because of your gender?
No, I was so lucky that actually sometimes maybe my armed forces in Denmark did the opposite, but I could basically sign up to whatever I wanted if I live up to the requirements. And I was also giving the chance. What I felt, and that's maybe worth noting, that sometimes I felt not because my superior was aware of it, I think, but I felt that the expectations to me was lower because they didn't thought that a female, could do that. And if you look at my size, I'm also not that big, but I'm a sports girl, right? So I can still outrun most of the soldiers. But it comes back to that sometimes the expectations are lower, and it also comes back to a positive thing that because there still are so few females, you get more focus. And that could also be an option to step forward and show them that, of course, you could do whatever you sign up for.
Yeah, about this training, I read in your interviews that you have a lot of training still to be able and capable to do that. But if we return to the other discussions in Latvia, one recent debate was about removal of railway tracks leading to Russia. And I would like to ask your opinion. Would this removal of tracks have a significant impact in a crisis situation?
Yeah, I think so, because we know the Russians rely very much on their logistic being transported on railways. But on the other hand, we of course also have to think about what we need to be able to move people and equipment.
This has become a longer discussion as well. We also quite a long time discussed Ottawa Convention. Do we spend too much time debating instead of deciding an action? What is your perspective on this?
I think sometimes debate is important to understand the necessity. But of course you can also say that time is essential. All European countries need to build up fast. So it's probably a little bit of both. It's hard for me to say either one or the other. But when it comes to the Ottawa Convention, I think it's important to understand what it means and how at least also I as a NATO commander can deal with that on the ground.
About Denmark still is the member of Ottawa Convention, right? And while the debate was still ongoing here, previous commander Leonid Kalniņš mentioned that in case if Latvia withdraws for this convention, anti-personnel mines will restrict our maneuvers, and for safety of soldiers, there will be areas where allies will not operate and we will be left alone. So can you tell if this decision to withdraw from convention really affects this future actions of our allies?
Well, what I can assure is that currently it doesn't, because Latvia has not procured any personal mines, right? So currently it's a theoretic challenge. But again, because we prepare ourselves on the worst case scenario, we of course discuss how could we handle that, because some countries have withdrawn, others haven't. And then I need to figure out what do I do on the ground in case we do lay out personal mines, and how do I make sure that we then still live up to the conventions that we have to and others that we don't have. But currently it's actually not an issue because we have no personal mines.
Also, you said earlier that every NATO country brings its own unique experience and skills, which we combine in the fight towards a common goal. And so our diversity is alliance's greatest strengths, but with all this unique experience and skills, is it easy to cooperate?
It's easy enough to cooperate, but I will of course also say that having many nations and having many of anything also complicate things. And in this area, one area where NATO has to improve is in the logistics, because it's still a national responsibility. And we need to figure out and find more multinational solutions, so we make what we call the logistic footprint smaller. And one of my units, the Multinational Brigade Latvia, where Canada is a framework nation, and it consists of 14 different countries. There are experimentation now and talking to different nations to try to see if we can develop that. But one thing is what we try to do on the ground. I also need NATO as higher headquarters to come up with some concepts, and I need nation to say yes to moving forward in this area, so we can have a logistic concept where we work even more together than we do today. Another area where we are challenged is when it comes to different kind of systems. And I think if you're, no matter where you're working, you have different kind of systems, and so we do in the armed forces. So even though NATO have requirements, it's a challenge to have systems being able to talk together, to exchange, especially classified information, but we are also working on that. And when I say we are working on that, maybe I would like to give one point, because it's also the whole approach we have in the division, that we need to try to do and work as much as we think we need to do if we have to go to war. Because if we don't do that on regular basis, and currently as we speak, we will not have the time to make it work. So one example, when we come back to communication systems, we are right now also being more out of the bases, more out of the training areas, doing real operations, right? Trying to be better at deterrence, try to support the Latvian armed forces. And here we use the opportunity to make sure that we have the best system linked up, for example, with the joint headquarters. And if we don't do it right now, we cannot make things work if we have to go into war. So the whole idea is to try to do as much in the same way as we would do if we have to go to war, because then now we have the time to try to improve it.
And with all this training, it works well now.
Yeah, I think the training works well, but we are actually moving a little bit away from training. And we are, for example, when it comes to, we're still having a lot of exercises, but we used to make a scenario for an exercise. We don't do that. We take the real plan and we exercise the real plan, and then we improve our skills. And of course we make adjustments, so it's not obvious what we will do. But we have also changed that. So instead of spending a lot of time in scenarios and scripting, what is called in my world, we take out the real plan and we move out and we do what we think we have to do.
And I think it works better.
Absolutely, and it also changed the mindset, right? Because the division first was stood up to be a training division, there are still people and also nations that has been there from the beginning that hasn't quite realized how much have changed since 22, right? Now we prepare for an eventual war. We prepare to be able to defend, and that's the main purpose.
Is there still NATO countries that still haven't realized the changes?
Yeah, the further south you go, I think it's more a part of a culture that, of course, there are nations that find it hard that Russia directly should attack them, but then it comes back to the whole NATO systems and how, we stand together, one for all and all for one. Of course, it's easier if you, for example, are from Sweden and Denmark, because it's much closer to the Baltics, but definitely there are nations that don't see the threat in the same way as we experience it here.
Can we do something to switch this mindset?
Yes and no. I think it's hard. It also depends on, again, politicians. Sometimes a country chooses somebody who is very much to the right or very much to the left. I think if I should say something, I think it makes sense that the countries that share borders or are in the same region work more together, like they can do it in other areas of Europe, right? So I think the fact that when Sweden and Finland joined NATO, and also when Sweden have signed up for this mission, it makes so much sense, because being here, if you are a Swedish officer or a Danish officer, it's also a part of your national defense, right? So it makes so much sense that the neighboring country at least are the first one that prioritize cooperation.
If we return here to Latvia and talk about, we had this recent changes. So how would you describe your cooperation with Chief of Defense of Latvia, Kaspars Pudens, and what are their major changes since comparing to Leonid Kalniņš?
I won't say there were, from my side, big changes between your previous chart and Kaspars now. I think the changes has been that not only am I in close dialogue and cooperation with the Chief of Defense, so are the staff members and the staff lower also. So we are much more aligned, we are much closer linked up, and we have also established some conversations where the generals in the division and the generals in the joint headquarters are sitting in the basement, no staff officers, just discussing, learning each other, discussing different issues, how we could solve that. So I think it has been improved a lot, also based on the openness and willingness from the Latvian side to explain to us how the challenges are seen from the nation itself, and then we try to find the common solutions.
You once also said at the beginning that feeling of we was not very strong, and you also said that immediately you understood that you had to make every effort to gain the trust of military colleagues and the publics. And have you managed to build this trust with military and society? How do you think?
Well, maybe you should ask that question to somebody else, but I have the perception, yes, that I have. And I think the main game changer was me as a NATO commander and my forces not only saying we would fight, but also showing that we are capable, willing and able to do so. And in more direct terms, I think when we sat down and developed a common defense plan, which we now exercise, I think that was, the main change. I fully understand why the Latvian officers and army was, unsecure. Could NATO react? Would they react? But I think we have found good solutions on that. So I think that was the main reason why we stand even closer together. And then, of course, it also comes back to the willingness and openness from both sides.
How you explain why this feeling of we was not very strong at the beginning?
Maybe because the one explanation that are most likely a number. One could be that the transformation from a training headquarter to a warfighting was in a very, very early stage. I'm also sure that it sometimes, or very often, cooperation depends on two sides that need to be able to dance together, if I could explain it that way. So maybe also some personalities. But I think also the fact that we have found solutions because there was a lot in the beginning about, could I fight if the North Atlantic Council hadn't declared an Article 5? And I can do that in the way I explained earlier. If I'm out there standing shoulder by shoulder, I have the right to defend myself. But also in the meantime, NATO have developed some new procedures that give Sarkis some more tools where he can act before an Article 5. So we don't need an Article 5 to defend Latvia if Latvia are being attacked. So I think there are a number of explanations why we are more aligned and why we have gained more trust to each other.
About trust with society, we also have a lot of discussions about this hybrid operation, disinformation. It also affected this trust at first?
No, not according to my knowledge and understanding. Actually, in a different area, if I may, that's one of the areas where we at NATO forces have learned a lot from being here, because we were not prepared on that kind of threat. None of us came from countries where that was that visible, at least not at that time. So it's actually one of the areas where I think we are a number of countries that have taken back the experience from here and now try to implement them back home. Let me just give you one example. The two highest ranking people working with strategic communications and information security in Denmark are coming visiting Latvia next week. They're both visiting the division, but also some institutes here in Latvia to learn from them, right? So.
And about the military, and how open should the military should be with society? Because on the one hand, we have all the secrets we don't want Russia to know about, and trust also needs to know something about what's going on and this honest conversation to have a society. So where is this balance?
It's of course a balance that we need to be very aware of, especially when we're exercising the plan. But you can make changes to that and you can also deal with that. I think it's more important that the population here in Latvia gets to know NATO forces, and at least, or even more important, also that my troops learn about your society, learn about the terrain, learn to interact with the people out there, because it's also to give them an opportunity to see with their own eyes and reassure them that, we are capable, willing and able to defend your country, right? So that's one of the things we have started, but I really think we need to try to be even more out there than we are currently. But it's going, and we now have permanent presence in different kinds of Latvia with NATO troops out to the east, and I think that's an area we will continue to develop.
So you have to, more communicate with local society, or politicians should be more transparent. What still have to be done?
Yeah, especially I think with the population, right? We have had a very good interaction during the last exercise, where we went to a number of schools to explain and tell them what is NATO, what we are doing, because it's a lot of different uniforms that also suddenly shows up in the area, right? So I think for me, it's less the politicians, but more the local population where we have to operate, that they get used to see NATO there, that we give them the opportunity to come and talk to us, explain what we are doing, where we are from, etc.
Is there a lot of interest from local community about what you have done here, what you're doing now, what are your plans, and do you have a lot of questions?
Actually, fewer questions to my level, except, for example, for interviews, but I also think that's the way it should be. I really want the soldiers on the ground to interact with the local populations, with the school, etc. So when they walk out there, they can have this conversation, they can look at the equipment, we can hand out, small books where the children can paint, etc. I think it's important that they know who we are and what we are doing in Latvia. So I really prefer that it's my troops out there that have the physical interaction with the population.
You have been commander of this multinational division North since August 2023. Have your impression of Latvia changed during this time?
I think, at least hopefully, but I also think so. I know much more about the country right now. But it also means that, at least in my case, I get even more engaged, right? I won't say that I have become one specific part more Latvian, but I really love the country, and I think for me to have that purpose here, to being able to defend another country, it's a huge task. That's an important task that really require that, I cannot do this half right. It's not just a job for me. It's, if you can say so, without, it sounds too higher. There's a higher meaning and purpose for me being here, and it really requires that I dedicate all my effort and all my willingness to fulfill that task.
Thank you for this interview. Paldies jums, ka skatījāties, un tiekamies nākamnedēļ.